Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the wooden shoes of a medieval woman. And let me tell you, you're about to experience a life so brutally difficult that your biggest complaint about slow Wi-Fi will seem absolutely ridiculous. Picture yourself as a young girl in 1300s Europe, where your very survival past age 5 was basically winning the lottery, except the odds were worse, and the prize was just more suffering. You probably won't survive this journey if we're being historically accurate. But hey, at least we can explore it from the safety of your cozy, modern bedroom. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment letting me know where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. I love seeing our little global community gather for these nighttime adventures. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're born in a dimly lit cottage where the smell of smoke, sweat, and something you can't quite identify fills your first breath. Your mother, if she survives the birth, and that's a significant if, has just endured what amounts to medieval Russian roulette. Childbirth mortality rates hover around 15%, meaning every 6th woman who gives birth simply doesn't make it through. No epidurals, no sterile conditions, just raw human endurance, and whatever herbal remedies the local wise woman can scrape together. Your first years are a constant dance with death. Historians still argue whether medieval people emotionally detached from children due to high mortality rates, but the numbers speak for themselves. Roughly 30 to 50% of children die before reaching adulthood. You're more likely to die than live, which puts a rather grim perspective on birthday celebrations. As a girl child, you're immediately worth less than your brothers, not just emotionally, but economically. Your family might love you, but society has already calculated your value, and it's disappointingly low. You'll never inherit land, you can't carry on the family name, and you're essentially an expensive mouth to feed until someone agrees to marry you, at which point you become their expensive mouth to feed. Your childhood education, if you can call it that, consists of learning domestic skills that would make a modern homemaker weep with exhaustion. By age 7, you're expected to spin thread, help with cooking, tend to younger siblings, and assist with whatever backbreaking labor keeps your family alive. No Disney princesses here, just tiny hands working until they bleed, because that's what survival looks like. The concept of childhood as a protected, carefree time simply doesn't exist for you. You're a miniature adult with adult responsibilities, but none of the privileges. While noble girls might learn some reading, usually just enough to manage a household or follow religious texts, most girls like you remain illiterate, cut off from any knowledge that might help you understand or improve your situation. Your toys, if any exist, are crude dolls made from scraps or simple wooden objects. But honestly, who has time for play when there's always work to be done? You learn early that your worth is measured by your usefulness, your silence, and eventually your ability to produce sons for whatever man your father eventually trades you to. Even your clothing marks your lesser status. Rougher fabrics, simpler cuts, always practical, never beautiful. You're being trained from birth to accept a life of service, submission, and sacrifice. The medieval world has already decided your fate before you can even walk. And every lesson, every expectation, every small daily humiliation is designed to prepare you for a lifetime of putting everyone else's needs before your own. This is your starting point, your foundation, a world that sees you as inherently less valuable, less capable, and less deserving of basic human dignity. And somehow, you're expected to be grateful for the privilege. You're now approaching your early teens, and suddenly everyone around you starts talking about your future as if you're a prize cow at market. Because, in many ways, that's exactly what you are. Your father, brothers, or male guardians begin eyeing you with a calculating look that has nothing to do with paternal love and everything to do with economic opportunity. Marriage for you isn't about romance, compatibility, or even basic human attraction. It's a business transaction where you're the commodity being traded. Your family needs to secure alliances, pay debts, or gain access to land, and your uterus is their bargaining chip. The average marriage age for women hovers between 12 and 15, though noble families often arrange marriages for girls as young as 7, with consummation delayed until puberty. How generous of them. You have absolutely zero say in this decision. While your future husband might be twice your age, cruel, diseased, or completely unknown to you, your opinion matters about as much as a sheep's thoughts on which pasture it prefers. The negotiation happens entirely between men, discussing your dowry, your family's social status, and your proven fertility potential as if you're livestock. The dowry system turns your family into debt collectors and you into collateral. Your parents must scrape together money, goods, or land to essentially pay someone to take you off their hands. If your family can't afford a decent dowry, you might end up with whatever desperate man will accept less, often someone significantly older, poorer, or with a reputation that explains why he's still unmarried. Historians still argue whether some medieval women exercised subtle influence over their marriage arrangements, but the legal reality remains stark, your property being transferred from one man to another. The marriage ceremony itself includes language about your father giving you away, and the symbolism isn't subtle. You're literally being handed over like a deed to property. Your wedding night arrives with all the romantic ambience of a real estate closing. You've possibly met your husband once or twice during negotiations, maybe shared a few chaperoned conversations, but now you're expected to submit to intimate relations with what amounts to a stranger. Medieval marriage manuals, written exclusively by men, naturally offer helpful advice, like the wife should remain silent and obedient during marital duties. The concept of marital rape doesn't exist in your world because the concept of a wife's consent doesn't exist. Your body belongs to your husband now, to use as he sees fit for producing heirs and satisfying his desires. Refusing your husband's advances isn't just socially unacceptable, it's grounds for punishment divorce, or worse. Your new living situation depends entirely on your husband's circumstances and temperament. You might find yourself managing a household, working alongside servants, or thrown into manual labor that makes your childhood chores seem like vacation activities. Some lucky women land kind, reasonable husbands, but that's pure chance, like winning a lottery you never chose to enter. The pressure to produce male heirs begins immediately and never stops. Every month that passes without pregnancy brings anxiety. Every miscarriage brings blame. And every daughter you produce instead of a son brings disappointment that everyone makes sure you feel personally responsible for. Your worth as a wife is measured almost entirely by your reproductive success, specifically your ability to produce sons who can inherit property and carry on bloodlines. If your husband dies, you don't automatically gain freedom. You might become property of his family, face forced remarriage to secure alliances, or find yourself completely destitute if his relatives decide you're more burden than asset. Widowhood might seem like liberation, but medieval society rarely allows women to exist independently. Your marriage has transformed you from your father's property to your husband's property, and you're expected to be grateful for this privilege. Love, respect, and partnership are luxuries that might accidentally happen, but they're never guaranteed, expected, or considered necessary for a successful marriage. Welcome to your daily routine as a medieval wife, where your typical day starts before dawn and ends well after everyone else has collapsed into bed. You're essentially running a small business, managing complex logistics, and performing physically demanding labor, except you're doing it all for free, with zero recognition. And if anything goes wrong, it's obviously your fault. Your morning begins with rekindling the fire, a task that sounds simple until you realize you're working with flint, steel, and tinder that may or may not cooperate with your urgent need for heat and light. No matches, no gas stoves, no electric anything, just you, some medieval fire-starting tools, and the growing pressure of a household that needs breakfast before they head out to their own backbreaking labor. Water doesn't magically appear from taps. You're hauling it from wells, streams, or cisterns, often multiple trips per day for cooking, cleaning, and basic hygiene. Each bucket weighs roughly 40 pounds when full, and you're carrying them by hand across uneven ground while managing your long skirts and whatever other tasks demand immediate attention. Your back aches constantly, but complaining about it is about as socially acceptable as criticizing the local lord's tax policies. Cooking involves an intricate dance with an open fire that could kill you if you're careless, and probably will kill you slowly through smoke inhalation if you're not. You're managing multiple pots, rotating spits, regulating heat by moving coals around, and somehow producing meals that keep everyone fed and healthy. No refrigeration means everything is preserved through salting, smoking, or pickling processes you've mastered, because failure means starvation. Your clothing production responsibilities are staggering. Every piece of fabric your family wears passes through your hands multiple times. You're cleaning wool, spinning thread, weaving cloth, cutting patterns, and sewing garments entirely by hand. A single shirt represents weeks of work, which explains why most people own maybe 2 or 3 changes of clothing total. You're also responsible for mending, washing, and maintaining everything, using harsh soaps that leave your hands cracked and bleeding. Historians still argue whether medieval women found satisfaction in their domestic expertise, but the sheer volume of work suggests little time for personal fulfillment. You're managing food storage that determines whether your family survives winter, producing medicines from herbs and folk knowledge, and somehow maintaining standards of cleanliness that prevent deadly diseases from wiping out everyone you love. Cleaning involves scrubbing floors with sand and lye, washing clothes by hand in cold water, and maintaining a household where sanitary conditions is a concept that won't be invented for several centuries. You're battling dirt, grease, and organic decay with tools that would make modern janitors quit on the spot: rough brushes, harsh chemicals that burn your skin, and endless physical labor. Child care isn't the gentle nurturing modern mothers might imagine. You're keeping small humans alive in a world designed to kill them. You're treating injuries with whatever medical knowledge you've absorbed from other women, making life or death decisions about illnesses, and somehow managing to feed growing children when food security is never guaranteed. Your husband's needs come first, always. His meals, his comfort, his social obligations, his personal care, everything revolves around ensuring his success and satisfaction. You might be exhausted, sick, or overwhelmed, but his needs take priority over your basic human requirements for rest, medical attention, or emotional support. The concept of labor unions, workplace safety, or personal time off doesn't exist for you. You work every day, all day, managing multiple complex tasks simultaneously while pregnant, nursing, or recovering from childbirth. There's no vacation time, no sick days, no retirement plan, just endless domestic labor until you literally can't continue anymore. Your expertise in managing these complex domestic operations is taken for granted, never acknowledged as skilled labor, and certainly never compensated. You're expected to perform at professional levels while being treated as if your contributions are natural, inevitable, and essentially worthless. You're pregnant again, maybe for the 3rd, 5th, or 8th time, and the familiar dread settles into your stomach alongside the growing life that might kill you both. Medieval pregnancy isn't the celebrated, carefully monitored experience modern women know. It's 9 months of playing Russian roulette with death, while everyone around you treats your terror as feminine weakness. Your prenatal care consists of folk wisdom passed down through generations of women who survived childbirth by sheer luck rather than medical knowledge. You're advised to avoid certain foods, perform specific prayers, and wear particular amulets, but nobody really understands what's happening inside your body or how to help when things go wrong. The medieval medical establishment, dominated entirely by men who have never experienced menstruation, let alone pregnancy, offers advice that ranges from useless to to actively dangerous. You continue your exhausting domestic labor throughout pregnancy because the concept of maternity leave won't be invented for roughly 600 years. You're hauling water, managing fires, lifting heavy objects, and performing physically demanding tasks while your body diverts energy toward growing a human being. Miscarriage rates hover around 20%, and everyone treats pregnancy loss as God's will rather than the predictable result of impossible physical demands on malnourished, overworked women. When labor begins, you're attended by local women whose expertise comes from experience rather than training. These midwives do their best with limited knowledge and primitive tools, but their primary qualification is having survived their own childbirths, hardly a comprehensive medical education. Pain relief doesn't exist beyond perhaps some alcohol or herbal concoctions that may or may not help and might actually make things worse. Your birthing position is determined by tradition rather than physics or comfort. You might labor standing, squatting, or lying down based on local customs, but nobody's optimizing your position for actual childbirth mechanics. The process takes as long as it takes, and if complications arise, your options range from prayer to procedures that sound more like torture than medicine. Historians still argue whether medieval birthing practices included some techniques that modern medicine has forgotten, but the mortality statistics tell the real story. Roughly 15% of women die in childbirth, and infant mortality rates reach 50% in some regions. You're literally risking your life every time you become pregnant, and pregnancy is essentially inevitable if you're married and fertile. Infections kill more new mothers than difficult births themselves. Without understanding germ theory, your attendants move between patients without washing hands, use non-sterile instruments, and create perfect conditions for deadly bacteria to flourish. Puerperal fever, postpartum infection, turns what should be recovery time into a slow, agonizing death that nobody knows how to prevent or treat. If you survive the birth, your recovery happens while maintaining full household responsibilities. No bed rest, no gradual return to activity, no special nutrition, just immediate resumption of domestic labor, while your body tries to heal from what amounts to a major medical trauma. You're expected to be grateful for surviving and immediately available for everyone else's needs. Breastfeeding provides no reprieve from other duties. You're nursing while cooking, cleaning, and managing other children, often leading to poor nutrition for both you and your baby. Supplemental feeding options are dangerous. Animal milk often carries diseases, and alternative foods frequently lack essential nutrients that lead to infant death. Your emotional experience of pregnancy and childbirth is considered irrelevant. Postpartum depression is interpreted as spiritual weakness or moral failing rather than a medical condition requiring treatment. You're expected to immediately bond with your child, resume sexual relations with your husband, and prepare for the next pregnancy regardless of your physical or emotional state. The constant cycle of pregnancy, childbirth, and recovery dominates your adult life. With limited contraception options and no right to refuse your husband's advances, you might face pregnancy annually until menopause or death, whichever comes first. Each pregnancy represents another roll of the dice with your life, and eventually, your luck might run out. You wake up one morning and realize you don't legally exist. Not in the dramatic, philosophical sense, but in the very real, practical sense that medieval law treats you as a piece of property, rather than a human being with rights, agency, or legal standing. Your legal identity is entirely subsumed under whatever man currently owns you, first your father, then your husband, and if you're unlucky enough to outlive him, possibly his male relatives. The legal doctrine of coverture means that marriage literally erases your legal personhood. You cannot own property, sign contracts, conduct business, or even control your own earnings without your husband's explicit permission. If you inherit land from your family, it automatically becomes your husband's property the moment you marry. Any money you earn through your labor, and you do labor, constantly belongs entirely to your husband, who has no legal obligation to share it with you, or even use it for household expenses. Your testimony in legal proceedings is worth less than a man's testimony, and in many cases, you cannot testify at all. If someone commits a crime against you, your husband must file the complaint because you lack standing to speak for yourself in court. This creates the absurd situation where your legal remedy for injustice depends entirely on convincing a man to care enough about your suffering to take action on your behalf. You cannot make a will without your husband's permission, which means you have no control over what happens to your personal possessions after death. Those few items that medieval society might consider yours, perhaps some jewelry, clothing, or household goods, can be distributed however your husband decides, regardless of your wishes or your children's needs. If your husband commits crimes, beats you, or squanders the family resources through gambling or poor business decisions, you have essentially no legal recourse. Divorce is nearly impossible and available only under extreme circumstances that rarely apply to typical marital problems. You're legally bound to a man who might be violent, incompetent, or destructive, with no exit strategy and no protection from his choices. Historians still argue whether some medieval women found ways to exercise influence through informal channels, but the formal legal system offers you nothing. Property law, contract law, criminal law, and civil law all treat you as an extension of your husband rather than an independent person deserving of basic rights. Your children, legally speaking, belong entirely to your husband. You have no custody rights, no say in their education or marriage arrangements, and no guarantee of access to them if your husband decides to restrict your contact. Despite carrying, birthing, and raising these children, they are legally his property, and he can dispose of them through marriage, apprenticeship, or other arrangements without consulting you. If you're widowed, your legal situation becomes even more precarious. You might gain some legal standing, but you're also incredibly vulnerable to family members who want to claim your husband's property creditors seeking payment for his debts, or local authorities who view independent women with suspicion. Widowhood might provide legal personhood, but it's the kind of freedom that comes with starvation, social isolation, and constant vulnerability. Business law excludes you from most profitable trades and professional guilds. You cannot become a merchant, artisan, or skilled craftsperson in your own right. Even if you possess expertise in valuable trades, and many women do, you cannot legally establish a business, enter contracts with suppliers, or accumulate wealth independently. Your skills and knowledge are essentially trapped within the domestic sphere, where they generate no personal financial security. The legal system that governs your life was created entirely by men, for men, to serve male interests. Every law, every precedent, every legal tradition assumes that women are naturally inferior, inherently unreliable, and fundamentally incapable of managing their own affairs. This isn't just discrimination. It's a comprehensive legal framework designed to ensure that half the population remains perpetually dependent on the other half. Your legal invisibility isn't an oversight or historical accident. It's a deliberate system designed to concentrate power, property, and authority in male hands, while ensuring that women remain economically dependent and socially controllable. The church isn't just influencing your spiritual life, it's micromanaging every aspect of your existence with an attention to detail that would make modern surveillance states jealous. From the moment you wake up until you fall asleep, religious authorities are dictating your behavior, appearance, thoughts, and even your private, intimate relationships with a level of control that's both comprehensive and suffocating. Your clothing choices are regulated by religious law that treats your body as inherently sinful and dangerous. You must cover your hair, maintain modest necklines, avoid bright colors that might attract attention, and generally dress in ways that signal your submission to both God and male authority. The church has specific rules about fabric types, dress lengths, and even jewelry, because apparently your eternal soul depends on your fashion choices. Your sexuality belongs entirely to the church hierarchy, who have developed elaborate rules about when, how, and why married couples can engage in intimate relations. Sex is only permissible for procreation, only in specific positions, only on certain days of the week, and never during religious holidays, menstruation, pregnancy, or nursing periods. This leaves roughly 12 days per year when marital intimacy is officially approved, though of course your husband's desires typically override religious scheduling. The church teaches that your female nature makes you inherently more susceptible to sin, temptation, and moral weakness. You're supposedly the spiritual descendant of Eve, who destroyed paradise through feminine curiosity and disobedience, which means you carry inherited guilt that requires constant vigilance and submission to male religious authority. Every priest, monk, and religious teacher reminds you that women are naturally deceptive, emotionally unstable, and spiritually inferior. Your access to religious knowledge is carefully controlled and filtered through male interpreters. You cannot read religious texts in Latin cannot participate in theological discussions, and certainly cannot challenge religious teachings that oppress you. The few religious roles available to women, primarily as nuns, require you to completely abandon family life, personal autonomy, and most forms of human connection. Religious confession becomes a tool for monitoring and controlling your private thoughts. You must regularly confess your sins to male priests who use this information to enforce behavioral compliance and gather intelligence about community activities. Your most private struggles, doubts, and experiences become information that religious authorities can use to maintain social control. Historians still argue whether some medieval women found empowerment through religious devotion, but the institutional church remained fundamentally committed to female subordination. Even female saints and religious figures were celebrated primarily for their submission, suffering, and rejection of worldly pleasures, hardly empowering role models for women seeking fulfillment or equality. The church controls your reproductive choices through religious doctrine that forbids contraception, abortion, or any attempt to limit fertility. You're required to accept every pregnancy as God's will, regardless of your health, economic circumstances, or ability to care for additional children. Attempts to control your reproductive destiny are treated as mortal sins that endanger your eternal soul. Religious holidays and observances dominate your calendar with fasting periods, special duties, and additional domestic labor disguised as spiritual obligations. During Lent, Advent, and various saint days, you're expected to increase your workload while decreasing your food intake, somehow maintaining household productivity while weakening your physical strength through enforced malnutrition. Your intelligence and curiosity are treated as dangerous temptations that lead to spiritual pride and disobedience. The church actively discourages female education, intellectual development, or independent thinking, arguing that women's minds are too weak for complex ideas and too susceptible to heretical thoughts. Knowledge is power, and the church ensures you remain powerless through ignorance. The threat of eternal damnation hangs over every aspect of your life, creating constant anxiety about whether your thoughts, actions, or circumstances might condemn you to hell. This psychological pressure ensures compliance with oppressive systems, while convincing you that your suffering is spiritually meaningful rather than socially constructed. Religious authority reinforces every other form of oppression you experience, providing divine justification for legal inequality, economic exploitation, and social marginalization. The church doesn't just tolerate your subjugation, it sanctifies it as God's intended order. You're working harder than any modern CEO, managing more complex operations than most small business owners, and producing more economic value than medieval merchants. Yet you're doing it all for free, while everyone pretends your labor doesn't count as real work. Welcome to the medieval economy, where your contributions are essential, invisible, and completely uncompensated. Your domestic labor alone represents a full-time job that would require multiple paid positions in any rational economic system. You're a chef, cleaning service, textile manufacturer, childcare provider, medical assistant, accountant, and logistics coordinator, all rolled into one person who works without wages, benefits, or even basic recognition that your work has economic value. The guild system, medieval Europe's version of professional organizations, systematically excludes you from most profitable trades while happily exploiting your unpaid labor to support male guild members. You might possess expertise in brewing, weaving, metalworking, or other valuable skills, but you cannot join guilds, establish your own businesses, or compete in markets where serious money changes hands. You're producing textiles that represent the backbone of medieval commerce, yet you see none of the profits from your expertise. Every piece of cloth your family uses passes through your hands multiple times. You're cleaning raw materials, spinning thread, weaving fabric, and creating finished goods that could sell for substantial sums in urban markets. But because this happens within the domestic sphere, it's considered natural female duty rather than skilled economic production. Your agricultural labor is just as essential and just as invisible. You're planting, weeding, harvesting, and processing food crops while managing dairy animals, poultry, and vegetable gardens that provide significant portions of your family's nutrition and income. Medieval agricultural manuals, written by men, consistently underestimate or ignore female contributions to farming operations. Historians still argue whether medieval women controlled informal economic networks through activities like brewing, baking, or small-scale trading. But even these opportunities were severely limited by legal restrictions on female business ownership. You might sell eggs, cheese, or ale to neighbors, but you cannot scale these activities into legitimate businesses that provide economic independence. If you're widowed and suddenly need independent income, your options are devastatingly limited. You might find work as a domestic servant, laundress, or wet nurse, all positions that pay subsistence wages for backbreaking labor. The skills you've developed managing a household don't translate into employment opportunities because society refuses to recognize domestic expertise as transferable professional knowledge. The few trades open to women, typically involving food service, textile work, or childcare, pay significantly less than comparable male occupations, while requiring similar skill levels and physical demands. Gender-based wage discrimination isn't an unfortunate byproduct of medieval economics. It's a deliberate system designed to ensure female economic dependence. Your unpaid labor subsidizes the entire medieval economy by reducing the cost of male workers who don't need to purchase cooking, cleaning, childcare, or textile services, because women provide these services for free. Every successful medieval man relies on unpaid female labor to maintain his productivity and profitability. Economic partnerships between spouses are legally impossible because wives cannot own property, sign contracts, or control business assets. Even if you contribute essential skills, knowledge, or labor to family enterprises. Your husband owns everything and controls all financial decisions. You're an unpaid employee in your own household economy. Your economic vulnerability is deliberate and systematic. By excluding you from profitable trades, denying you legal control over assets, and refusing to compensate your labor, medieval society ensures that you remain financially dependent on male relatives who can control your behavior through economic leverage. The medieval economy depends entirely on your unpaid labor, while simultaneously denying that your work has economic value. It's a system so perfectly designed to exploit female productivity that economists still haven't fully calculated the true economic impact of unpaid domestic labor in historical contexts. Welcome to medieval medicine, where your female anatomy is blamed for everything from bad weather to political instability, and the prescribed treatments are more likely to kill you than whatever ailment brought you to seek help in the first place. Medieval physicians, all male and most of whom have never examined a female patient, have developed elaborate theories about your body that combine misogyny, superstition, and dangerous ignorance into a medical system designed to harm you. Your menstrual cycle is treated as a monthly illness that proves your inherent physical weakness and spiritual corruption. Medieval medical texts describe menstruation as toxic blood that poisons your body and mind, making you temporarily insane, physically contaminated, and dangerous to be around. You're literally quarantined during your period, forbidden from preparing food, touching holy objects, or participating in normal social activities, because your natural biological function is considered spiritually and physically hazardous. Pregnancy and childbirth are medicalized in ways that prioritize theoretical knowledge over practical experience. Male physicians override the wisdom of experienced midwives with treatments based on classical texts written by men who never witnessed a birth. They prescribe bloodletting for pregnant women, recommend dangerous positions for labor, and suggest interventions that increase mortality rates while claiming superior medical authority. Your mental and emotional health are explained entirely through your reproductive organs. Feeling sad, angry, frustrated, or intellectually curious. Obviously, your uterus has wandered around your body, causing hysteria, a diagnosis that attributes any female emotion or independent thought to organ dysfunction, requiring immediate male medical intervention. The cure often involves marriage, pregnancy, or painful procedures designed to restore your uterus to its proper position and mindset. Medieval medical theory teaches that women's bodies are essentially defective versions of male bodies, lacking sufficient heat to develop properly, and therefore prone to physical and mental weakness. This one-sex model means that your anatomy is understood only in relation to male bodies, with female-specific medical needs either ignored or misinterpreted through masculine anatomical assumptions. Historians still argue whether folk medical traditions preserved by women provided more effective treatments than formal medicine. But male physicians consistently dismissed female medical knowledge as superstitious nonsense, while promoting their own theories based on ancient texts rather than observation or experience. Your pain is routinely dismissed or minimized because medieval medical theory teaches that women naturally experience more physical suffering due to their inferior constitution. Complaints about chronic pain, difficult menstruation, or childbirth complications are often attributed to feminine weakness rather than legitimate medical problems requiring treatment. Surgical procedures on women are performed without anesthesia beyond perhaps some alcohol or herbal preparations that provide minimal pain relief. Medieval surgeons operate on female patients based on their understanding of male anatomy, often causing additional injury through procedures that don't account for female anatomical differences. Your life expectancy is significantly shorter than men's, partially due to childbirth mortality, but also because medical treatment actively harms your health. Bloodletting, purging, and other standard treatments weaken already malnourished women while addressing symptoms rather than underlying health problems. Medical diagnosis relies heavily on examining your urine, pulse, and general appearance rather than understanding female physiology. Physicians make confident pronouncements about your health based on theoretical knowledge that bears little relationship to actual female anatomy or common health problems affecting women. The medical profession's attitude toward female patients combines condescension, fear, and disgust in ways that ensure you receive inferior care while paying the same fees as male patients. Your symptoms are less likely to be taken seriously. Your pain is more likely to be dismissed, and your treatment is more likely to be based on moral judgments about your character rather than medical assessment of your condition. Medieval medicine treats your female body as inherently pathological, requiring constant monitoring and intervention by male authorities who understand your anatomy better than you do despite never having experienced menstruation, pregnancy, or any other female biological process. You exist in a world where violence against women is so normalized that it barely registers as noteworthy, let alone criminal. Your physical safety depends entirely on the goodwill of men who face no legal consequences for harming you, creating an environment of constant vulnerability that shapes every decision you make and every relationship you navigate. Domestic violence isn't just tolerated, it's legally sanctioned and socially encouraged as a legitimate method for husbands to maintain household discipline. Your husband has the legal right to beat you for disobedience, poor housekeeping, failure to produce sons, or simply because he's having a bad day. Medieval law typically only intervenes if he kills you, and even then, the punishment might be minimal if he can claim justification. The concept of marital rape doesn't exist because your consent to sexual relations was permanently granted at marriage and cannot be withdrawn. Your husband can force sexual contact regardless of your health, emotional state, or personal desires, and refusing him is grounds for punishment rather than legal protection. Your body belongs to him, and the law enforces his right to use it however he chooses. Public spaces are dangerous for women traveling alone, especially if you're young, attractive, or perceived as lacking male protection. Sexual assault by strangers, acquaintances, or even family members rarely results in serious legal consequences for perpetrators, while victims face social stigma, family shame, and accusations of somehow provoking the attack through improper behavior or appearance. War brings additional layers of vulnerability, as conquering armies routinely rape and murder civilian women without facing military discipline. You're considered legitimate spoils of war, and military leaders often reward successful soldiers with access to female captives. Even in peacetime, soldiers stationed in your area pose constant threats to your safety and that of your daughters. Your legal testimony about violence against you is worth less than male testimony, making it nearly impossible to seek justice through official channels, even in the rare cases where authorities might be willing to intervene. If you're assaulted by a man of higher social status, your chances of legal recourse drop to essentially zero, regardless of witnesses or evidence. Historians still argue whether medieval communities sometimes provided informal protection for women facing extreme violence, but the formal legal and social systems offered virtually no meaningful safety nets. Your protection depended entirely on having male relatives willing and able to defend you, creating additional vulnerability for women without strong family connections. Your vulnerability extends to economic violence through inheritance laws that leave you destitute if male relatives decide to claim property you've helped build and maintain. Widowhood often means facing immediate homelessness, forced remarriage to unsuitable men, or complete dependence on relatives who may view you as an unwelcome burden. Female children in your household face similar vulnerabilities from an early age, with little protection from sexual abuse by male family members, neighbors, or authority figures. Child marriage laws offer minimal protection, and the concept of childhood sexual abuse as traumatic rather than shameful for victims won't develop for centuries. Your social isolation increases your vulnerability because medieval society provides few opportunities for women to form supportive networks independent of male oversight. You cannot easily warn other women about dangerous men, organize collective protection strategies, or seek help without going through male intermediaries who may not take your concerns seriously. The constant threat of violence shapes your behavior in ways that modern women might find difficult to understand. You modify your clothing, speech, and activities to avoid attracting attention that might provoke male aggression. You develop hypervigilance about male moods, learning to read subtle signs of anger or intoxication that might signal immediate danger to yourself or your children. Your daughters will inherit this same vulnerability, and you're responsible for teaching them survival strategies disguised as proper feminine behavior. You're passing down generations of trauma-informed responses to male violence, while pretending it's natural social order rather than systematic oppression backed by legal and religious authority. Your husband is dead, and while part of you might feel relief from escaping his control, the medieval world has prepared a special kind of hell for women who dare to exist independently. Widowhood brings a brief moment of legal personhood, immediately followed by economic devastation, social isolation, and vulnerability that makes your previous oppression seem like luxury. If you're lucky, your husband left a will that provides some financial security, but medieval inheritance law favors male heirs, who often view you as an expensive burden, consuming resources that rightfully belong to them. Your stepchildren, brothers-in-law, or other male relatives may challenge your right to remain in your own home, claiming that property your labor helped build and maintain should revert to male control now that its rightful owner is deceased. Your economic situation becomes desperate almost immediately because medieval society provides no social safety net for independent women. The domestic skills that sustained your household for decades don't translate into paid employment opportunities, and most profitable trades remain closed to female participants regardless of your expertise or desperation. You might be forced into rapid remarriage with whatever man will accept a woman past her prime reproductive years, often someone significantly older, poorer, or with serious character flaws that explain his availability. These marriages are rarely about companionship or even economic partnership. You're essentially trading your remaining labor and any assets you've managed to retain for basic survival security. Alternatively, you might find work as a domestic servant, returning to the same backbreaking labor you've performed your entire life, but now receiving subsistence wages instead of the minimal security that marriage provided. Your previous status as a respectable married woman disappears, and you're relegated to servant quarters, treated as socially inferior and vulnerable to exploitation by employers who know you have limited alternatives. Religious institutions offer the convent as an option, but entering religious life typically requires a substantial dowry that you probably don't possess, and monastic life involves surrendering whatever independence widowhood theoretically provided. You're trading one form of controlled existence for another, though convent life might offer more security than trying to survive independently. Historians still argue whether some medieval widows achieved meaningful independence through business activities or property management, but these success stories were exceptional rather than typical. Most widowed women faced immediate economic crisis followed by gradual descent into poverty, social marginalization, and complete dependence on charity or reluctant family assistance. Your social status plummets from respectable married woman to potentially dangerous independent female who threatens social order simply by existing outside male control. Neighbors view you with suspicion, authorities question your morality, and potential employers assume you're either sexually available or morally compromised by your lack of male oversight. If you have young children, your situation becomes even more precarious because you cannot legally make decisions about their future without male guardian approval. Yet, you're responsible for their daily care and survival with severely limited resources. Your children might be taken from you and placed with male relatives who can provide proper guidance and economic support. The loneliness of widowhood extends beyond social isolation to complete exclusion from decision-making processes that affect your life. Community leaders, religious authorities, and family members make plans for your future without consulting you, treating you as a problem to be solved rather than a person with preferences, skills, or agency. Your vulnerability to violence increases dramatically as an unprotected woman in a society that views female independence as inherently suspicious and morally dangerous. You face harassment, sexual assault, and economic exploitation with no male relative obligated to defend your interests or seek justice on your behalf. The few legal rights that widowhood theoretically provides, such as the ability to own property or conduct limited business, are often meaningless in practice because social prejudice and economic discrimination make it nearly impossible to exercise these rights effectively. Your widowhood represents a brief, terrifying glimpse of what female independence looks like in medieval society. Impoverished, isolated, vulnerable, and ultimately unsustainable without male protection. That comes at the cost of surrendering whatever autonomy you've temporarily gained. Your social class was determined at birth and will follow you to your grave like an invisible chain that restricts every opportunity, relationship, and aspiration you might dare to harbor. Medieval society operates on the charming principle that God personally assigned everyone their proper place in the social hierarchy, which means questioning your status isn't just socially inappropriate, it's borderline heretical. If you're born a peasant, you'll die a peasant, and your daughters will continue the tradition of backbreaking agricultural labor, early marriage to equally poor men, and acceptance of whatever scraps the upper classes decide to leave for you. Social mobility for medieval women is essentially non-existent because the few paths to advancement, military service, religious scholarship, or commercial success are closed to your gender regardless of your intelligence, ambition, or capabilities. Your clothing, food, housing, and even your choice of marriage partners are regulated by sumptuary laws that ensure everyone can immediately identify your social status and treat you accordingly. You cannot dress above your station, eat foods reserved for higher classes, or aspire to relationships that might blur social boundaries. Even if you somehow acquired wealth, you cannot legally display it in ways that might suggest social advancement. Noble women face their own unique restrictions disguised as privileges, your valuable property rather than worthless property. But you're still property. Your marriage arrangements involve higher stakes and more complex political considerations, but you have even less personal choice because your reproductive capacity affects alliances between powerful families, regional politics, and international relations. The concept of individual merit determining social position doesn't exist in your world. Your intelligence, work ethic, moral character, or personal achievements matter far less than the circumstances of your birth and your gender. Medieval society has convinced itself that current social arrangements reflect divine will and natural law rather than human-constructed systems designed to benefit those already in power. Your access to education, if any exists, is determined entirely by your family's social status and their willingness to invest in female learning, which is generally considered wasteful since educated women are viewed as potentially dangerous and certainly unmarriageable. Knowledge is power, and medieval society carefully controls who receives education to maintain existing hierarchies. If you're from merchant or artisan families, you might witness your brothers gaining access to training, travel, and business opportunities that could never be extended to you regardless of your aptitude or interest. You're watching from the sidelines as male siblings receive investments in their future, while your family's resources are directed toward accumulating a dowry that will essentially purchase someone to take responsibility for you. Historians still argue whether some medieval women found ways to transcend class limitations through exceptional circumstances. But these rare examples prove the rule rather than challenging the system. For every woman who achieved unusual independence or influence, thousands remained trapped within the social position assigned at birth. Your daily interactions are governed by complex rules about appropriate behavior towards social superiors and inferiors, with severe consequences for failing to demonstrate proper deference or accidentally overstepping social boundaries. You must constantly perform your class status through speech, posture, clothing, and attitude, creating exhausting psychological pressure to conform to expectations that may conflict with your personality or preferences. The feudal system creates multiple layers of obligation and dependence that ensure you cannot escape your social position, even if individual circumstances might otherwise permit advancement. You owe labor, loyalty, and deference to social superiors, while maintaining authority over those beneath you, creating a complex web of relationships that reinforce existing hierarchies. Your economic opportunities are limited not just by gender discrimination, but by class restrictions that reserve profitable activities for specific social groups. Even if legal barriers to female participation were removed, class barriers would still prevent you from accessing the capital, connections, and credentials necessary for commercial success. The psychological impact of rigid class systems extends beyond external restrictions to internalized beliefs about your own capabilities and worth. Medieval society teaches you that your social position reflects your inherent value as a human being, making it psychologically difficult to imagine alternatives or question the system that oppresses you. Your class status affects every aspect of your life, from diet and health care to legal treatment and marriage prospects, creating compound disadvantages that make social mobility not just difficult, but nearly impossible. You're trapped within social boundaries that feel as natural and immutable as physical laws. Despite everything we've explored tonight, the legal invisibility, economic exploitation, medical mistreatment, constant vulnerability, and systematic oppression that defined medieval women's lives, you somehow endure. You find ways to survive, resist, and occasionally even thrive within systems designed to crush your spirit and limit your possibilities. Your resilience becomes a quiet revolution that medieval authorities never quite manage to suppress completely. You develop underground networks of female support that operate beneath the radar of official male oversight. Women share medical knowledge that actually works, unlike the dangerous theories promoted by male physicians. You pass down practical wisdom about childbirth, herbal remedies, and survival strategies through informal conversations that preserve essential knowledge across generations. Your domestic expertise becomes a form of subtle power that men depend on, but never fully understand or control. You manage complex household economies, make crucial decisions about resource allocation, and maintain social relationships that keep communities functioning. Your unpaid labor sustains medieval civilization, and your withdrawal of cooperation could collapse entire social systems, though few people recognize this dependency. You find creative ways to exercise agency within restrictive circumstances, negotiating with husbands, influencing children's futures, and building relationships that provide emotional sustenance and practical support. Your resistance often looks like compliance to external observers, but you're constantly making small choices that preserve your dignity and protect your loved ones within impossible circumstances. Some of you discover religious devotion as a path toward meaning and limited independence, finding in spirituality a realm where female experience and insight matter despite institutional church oppression. Mystical traditions, religious communities, and devotional practices provide spaces for intellectual and emotional development that secular society denies you. Your endurance inspires daughters who will face similar challenges, but with the benefit of your accumulated wisdom about survival strategies, relationship navigation, and psychological resilience. Each generation of women builds on the knowledge and experience of their predecessors, slowly developing collective expertise about managing oppression and finding moments of joy within difficult circumstances. Historians still argue whether medieval women's resistance strategies constituted meaningful rebellion against patriarchal systems, but your daily survival represents a form of victory that shouldn't be underestimated. Every day you refuse to surrender your humanity to systems designed to dehumanize you is an act of revolutionary resistance. You create beauty, laughter, and love within circumstances that seem designed to prevent such experiences. Your relationships with other women provide emotional sustenance and practical support that makes survival possible. Your care for children transmits values and knowledge that transcend the immediate circumstances of oppression. Your stories, songs, and traditions preserve female perspectives that official male-dominated culture ignores or suppresses. Through informal cultural transmission, you maintain alternative narratives about women's capabilities, experiences, and worth that challenge dominant ideologies, even when you cannot openly rebel against them. The very fact that you survive these conditions and raise daughters who also survive represents a profound triumph over systems designed to break your spirit. Your persistence ensures that female humanity endures despite centuries of legal, economic, religious, and social oppression that sought to reduce you to mere property or reproductive vessel. Your legacy extends far beyond the medieval period, as the survival strategies, resilience, and wisdom you developed continue to influence how women navigate oppression across different historical contexts. You are the ancestors whose strength made it possible for future generations to imagine and create more equitable societies. And now, as we drift toward the end of our journey together, let yourself feel the weight of this historical knowledge settle gently into perspective. These medieval women, your historical sisters, faced challenges that make your daily frustrations seem manageable by comparison. They endured, they resisted, they survived against overwhelming odds, passing down threads of resilience that eventually wove into the freedoms you enjoy today. Their stories remind us that human dignity persists even in the darkest circumstances, that love and creativity flourish despite systematic oppression, and that the courage to simply continue existing can be the most profound form of rebellion. As you slip into sleep tonight, carry with you the quiet strength of these forgotten women, whose names we may not know, but whose legacy lives in every freedom you take for granted. Rest well, knowing that you are the answer to their dreams of a better world for their daughters. Sweet dreams.